The Battle for Castle Itter. The Battle for Castle Itter was fought on the 5th of May 1945, just days before the end of World War II in Europe. It has been described as one of the strangest battles in history. The castle itself was and still is a small affair dating from at least the middle of the 13th century and situated on a high knoll near the village of Itter in the Austrian Tyrol. During the Second World War it was occupied by the Germans, and from 1943 the SS turned it into a prison under the administration of Dachau concentration camp. Its main purpose was to hold high-profile, mainly French prisoners. Amongst them were former Prime Ministers Edouard Daladier and Paul Reynaud, along with other selected military and political figures. Also imprisoned in the castle was a tennis star, Jan Barota, and a Yugoslav resistance member by the name of Zvonimir Kukovic. The commander of the prison in May 1945 was Sebastian Wimmer, under Eduard Weiter, the commander of Dachau. Wimmer, along with the guards, fled on May the 4th after the suicide of his superior, leaving the prisoners alone and unguarded, except for a single wounded SS officer left behind in an attempt to protect the prisoners from SS reprisals. As the prisoners armed themselves, Kukovic liberated a motorbike from the local shopkeeper and set off in the direction of Wurgel, a small town 6 miles away, in the hope of finding Allied forces. The town was, unknown to Kukovic, mostly occupied by the SS. However, luck was on the Yugoslavian side, as instead of SS troops he actually encountered Major Gangl and several soldiers of the German army. Gangl seemed to understand that the war was totally lost, and understood the situation at the castle. Between them they decided to split up, bettering their chances of finding US troops known to be in the area. Kukovic headed southwest to Innsbruck, recently taken by the 103rd Infantry, and Gangl, along with a Kubelwagen and a truck with 20 or so German soldiers, headed northeast towards Kufstein. Kukovic encountered elements of the 103rd Infantry Division and Major John Kramer's. They soon formed a small task force of 4 M10 tank destroyers, 3 jeeps, and a truck bearing a platoon of infantrymen, and set off towards the castle. Meanwhile, Major Gangl had entered Kufstein under a white flag and encountered First Lieutenant Jack Lee and elements of the 23rd Tank Battalion's forward command post. He volunteered to take a patrol up to the castle to secure the French captives. Lee chose 8 men to man the patrol's 2 Shermans, named Besot and Jenny, Lee's own tank, and Bosch Buster, commanded by Lieutenant Harry Bass, the motorpool officer. Lee also enlisted 6 members of the All-African-American Company D, 17th Armoured Infantry Battalion, to ride atop the tanks. Lee later recruited 5 more M4s and crews from the 36th Infantry Division. Bringing up the rear of the column were Gangl in his Kubelwagen and the truckload of German soldiers. Upon arrival in Wurgel, Lee found that the SS had abandoned the town, and leaving 5 tanks to defend it, set off with Besot and Jenny, Bosch Buster, 14 Americans, and the Germans towards the castle. The only obstacle to this was a small bridge over a deep ravine that they needed to cross. This had been wired with explosives by the SS. The German soldiers removed these, and Bosch Buster, now commanded by Sergeant Elliot, was left behind to guard the bridge, as the rest pushed on towards the castle. Lee, his tank, the American and German soldiers dispersed SS troops on the road before finally arriving at the castle as night began to fall. Strangely, the French occupants, although perturbed by the sight of German soldiers, warmed more to Gangl than to Lee. Lee being bold and brash. He was, however, a very good soldier, and within minutes of arrival had organised the defences of the castle. These defences included French political prisoners and generals, a tennis player, US troops, including black soldiers, German soldiers, and even the single SS officer. Lee decided that staying and defending the castle from any attack was the safer option, not having enough vehicles to move everyone back to Kufstein. That attack began just before midnight when Waffen-SS troops in the hills opened fire on the castle with small arms fire. An exchange of fire rumbled on in the hours of darkness, but at first light the battle swung in the SS's favour, as they managed to bring up an 88mm anti-tank gun to fire at the castle. The second shot destroyed Besot and Jenny, who had been placed in the main gate to cover the approach to the castle. Now that the tank had been knocked out, the SS attacked with new vigour, closing in on the castle walls. Lee and Gangle moved to the roof in an attempt to spot the location of the 88. Before they could, however, Gangle was shot and killed by a sniper. While the battle was raging, Major Kramers had arrived at the bridge, still guarded by Bosch Buster. However, due to jurisdiction issues, he had been forced to leave his armour and infantry in the town. He now had only himself, a French liaison officer, an American correspondent and his French photographer, all in a jeep. Nevertheless, the group set off towards the battle. It grew as it went onwards, as elements of the 142nd Infantry Regiment, including tanks and half-tracks, joined them. He managed to communicate with Lee by the means of simply calling the castle on a telephone from the town. He assured the beleaguered defenders that relief was on its way. By midday, the relief force had not yet arrived, and the situation inside the castle was desperate. With high casualties and low on ammunition, Lee accepted an offer by Barota to leave the castle to try to direct the relief force. The former tennis star slipped out during a lull in the fighting. He dashed across 40 yards of open ground, eluded the SS, and set off towards Vargel, as Lee prepared his unlikely command for a last stand. Sensing victory, the SS troops pressed their assault on the castle's entrance. At about 3 in the afternoon, they were preparing to fire an anti-tank rocket at the front gate of the castle as a prelude to the final assault. The rocket was never fired. The relief force, led by Kramers and guided by Barota, appeared in the SS's rear. Realizing that they were now at a distinct disadvantage, the SS fled, and the battle was over. As a result of the action, Lee was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross and promoted to captain, and Bass received the Silver Star. Gangle was honoured as an Austrian national hero and had a street named after him in Bargel.